pages inside the website. And we're going to go over some of these pages today. So this is kind of just what we envision and what we're going to build today. And I hope you guys can stick along for the ride. So I'm going to first start off by actually talking about what kind of goes into designing this website. Before you start building anything, really, like I said, you do want to build a vision of the website. But an important aspect in actually building a vision and how you start to create a website is to figure out the colors that are going to be incorporated into your website. So we're going to be talking about a very cool tool that a lot of people use when they're designing a website, which is called Coolors. What Coolors essentially is it's basically a website where you can see a lot of trendy color palettes and utilize these color palettes in your website or any really piece of artwork that you plan to make. So if you just go on this website, coolors.co, you can explore trendy palettes here and look through a wide variety of palettes that are very popular on the website. This is going to take a long time. Yeah. And you can click in any one of these and they'll give you the color codes in order to use them on your website or whatever piece of artwork that you like. So we already chose a color palette going into this. This is a color palette that we're going to be utilizing throughout our portfolio page today. And as we're working through this portfolio website, we're going to be commonly coming back in here to reference these colors and to use them on our website. So with that, let's actually start coding. So the first thing that I would like everyone to do is to figure out some way to kind of get your HTML5 boilerplate up and running. For me personally, I find it very easy whenever I start any website is to have this extension here. It's 100% optional, and there's several different places. You can just look up HTML5 boilerplate just to copy it down. But this is just a very nice tip, and it's very easy to kick off building a website when you have the boilerplate ready to download. So I'll give everyone a minute to download this because it wasn't mentioned in the PowerPoint, and that's HTML5 boilerplate. All you have to do is, if you are using VS Code, is to come down to this extensions section, look up HTML boilerplate. It looks like, okay, there we go. And I think I misspelled it. Yep, okay. My VS Code is very buggy, but anyways, it should be one of the first things that comes up. And right here where it says uninstall, I believe, you should have a reciprocal icon called install. And as Max mentioned earlier, we are also going to be using the live server extension, which we also used in the previous workshop. And if you weren't there and you're a little behind, in order to install that, it's very similar as well. You simply type up the live server extension and it comes up. And right here, I already have it installed, so it says uninstall. So all you have to do is install for that. So for those two extensions, I'm going to give everyone a minute to get that up and working. And meanwhile, please feel free to have enlist any questions that you have for anyone in the chat, as the moderators are there to answer any questions, whether that be regarding the color palette or making a website or the extensions. If anyone needs more time to download these, just give me a heads up in the chat and we'll wait a little. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of get started in coding so no one has to wait that much longer. When you open up your VS Code, it's not going to look like this exactly. Let me try to hide this here. Okay, how do you hide the little top thing? Okay, here, I figured it out. So it's gonna look something like this. And basically what you wanna do is you wanna just find a folder for you to start building your website portfolio. So for me, I'm just gonna open a folder right here and let me put it in my documents. I'm gonna create a new folder. And for this, I'm just gonna call it, maybe I'm gonna call it portfolio. So I'm going to open this folder now. So now I've opened up a VS Code workspace with an empty folder right here. And this is critical to starting my project because this is going to be where we start making everything. So the first thing that goes into every website, as mentioned from the previous workshop, is kind of your HTML template. So I'm going to right click and create an HTML file. Oops. And it's pretty standard to name your HTML files index.html. So that's where we're going to name it for our website. The next thing that I want to do is I want to utilize my boilerplate. Once again, this is a point where you can use a different extension or a different way. There's multiple ways to get a boilerplate up and working, or you can just copy online a certain HTML5 boilerplate. But this essentially what it does is it just pre-writes a lot of kind of the basic structures for what goes into my website or HTML5 structure. If any of you are taking Intro to C, a good, I guess, example of this would be if I was to create a C boilerplate, it will have the main method already pre-written and maybe some common packages imported. So that's kind of the idea of a boilerplate. So right here, I get a bunch of stuff, but I don't really, not all of this is important. A lot of these things are common, so you can easily ignore that. I can just delete it and it won't cause that big of a deal. But before we touch any of this boilerplate, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it with the live server extension. All you have to do is right click and click open with live server. And this is just to double check that, you know, my website is up and working, or more importantly, my live server extension is working. Right now, I didn't put anything on my website, didn't put anything on my HTML file besides the boilerplate. So nothing comes up. So I'm going to give my website a title first. I'm just going to call it portfolio for now. And from this, I'm going to go into the body here. And you can ignore this little script tag here. This is just something that is apparent in the live server extension in order for it to work. So this is, you can completely ignore. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a header first. And in this header, I'm going to say, welcome to my portfolio page. And this is just going to make sure that my live server extension is working and the website is actually being updated every time I input something. So now this is my website. From here, remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it look as much as the portfolio site that we mentioned earlier. So what the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into our color palette here. And we're going to figure out what we want to set as our desktop background, or my bad, not my desktop background, the background of the website. I'm going to decide to choose this Oxford blue color. And how to use colors.co here is whenever I want to select a color in one of these color palettes, I just click on it and it gives me the hex code by default, but I can change this to be for the color to be represented any other way. I'm going to choose a hex value here. It's going to be very useful. And from here, I'm going to go into my HTML page, and I'm going to want to add that as a background. Now, obviously, when it comes to giving your website a background, it's not really HTML code. You're not adding elements to your website. Instead, what you're doing is you're styling the page. So the next step on our HTML file is to kind of associate it with a CSS file. So in order to do that, all you have to do is in this boilerplate, you will see that it already comes along with this on line 13 here, this little fragment of code that says link rel, relative style sheet, and href. We'll see this href tag a lot today, and href just kind of refers to like a link. But in this instance, what I can do is I can use it in order to reference files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file, or I'm going to want my HTML file to be associated with a CSS file that I'm going to arbitrarily name style.css. Now, if I click on this right now, it's going to say that I'm unable to open it. And the reason for this is because I never made a style.css, as some of you may assume. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the file here, and I have my CSS file up and working. I'm going to start working on the desktop background in the CSS file here. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it an HTML tag. And what an HTML tag refers to, in essence, is kind of the whole page as a whole. It's nothing specific, but the whole page as a whole. So what I'm going to do is a style element that I know I want to add to the whole page is quite literally its background. So in order to do that, all I have to do is type in the keyword background color. And this is very it's very intuitive. It just adds a background color to my whole page. And with this, you will see that a bunch of colors come up here. But what I want to do is I want to add the color from colors.co that I copy and pasted. And for that, it's this hex code. So in order for us to use a hex code, if you remember from the previous workshop, we're going to have to use this hashtag little thing. So from there, if I save this and I save my index.html, I can go back to my website here, and I'll see I have a beautiful dark blue background. So now this is kind of the start of what we're going to build on our portfolio page. The next thing I want to do is I want to create, kind of my name here. I kind of want to get rid of this header first of all, but more importantly, I want to create the header like somewhere around here. And I wanted to say my name, very similar to the portfolio site we showed earlier. So I'm going to go into my style.c. I'm going to go into my HTML5 here. And I'm going to use a header element still because I quite literally still want to create a header. But this time, I don't want it to say, welcome to my portfolio page. I wanted to say very similar to what we envisioned, which was our name. So for this, let's pretend my name is John Smith. That's not my name, but let's pretend that is. And with that, I also wanted to say that what my position is. Let's maintain the same position as aspiring soft. Okay. Okay, this happens sometimes with my computer. I don't know why, but you're just gonna have to ignore that sometimes. Okay, let me Control Z everything here. Okay, there we go. So in my header, I'm gonna put aspiring. I'm gonna make sure to type slowly, software engineer. And with this, I save it and I come back and I see the header is in the same exact position. I didn't do anything fancy to it, but now instead it says John Smith, aspiring software engineer. Obviously, this is not where I want it to be positioned. I want it to be positioned a little bit more down here. And secondly, what I want to do is I want this John Smith and this aspiring software engineer to be stylistically different. As I'm kind of envisioning how I want this header to look like, I kind of want this John Smith to be a little bit bigger because it has less letters. And I want this to be underneath it, as in these two elements should be right on top of each other, with it in a smaller font. So whenever you're creating, so this is a good tip to kind of take away from here, which is every time that you're starting to work with new elements or you're kind of envisioning something for your website, make sure you think most importantly about the styles that you're going to associate with those set amount of elements and what they share. So I'm going to show you why that's very important here. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to separate John Smith and aspiring software engineer into two separate elements. I'm going to use a span for this. And I don't believe we went over much about what a span does in the previous workshop, but usually spans are utilized in order to simply just hold text. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this John Smith here. And I'm going to conversely also use a span to put this bottom portion of aspiring software engineer. If I go back to the page right now, you're going to see that nothing really happens because I really didn't change much of the page. In fact, a very cool trick when you're working with websites that you're going to utilize a lot is using inspect element. And with this, what I can do is I can inspect element this page. And if I just open up, this is my HTML code, by the way. If I go into my body and I look at this stuff, here's my header 1. You're going to see that my header 1 and my spans, even though these spans are kind of inside this header, they don't have space to kind of be on top of each other or on a separate level. They're all embodied within this header, which is all on this level. So obviously, I want to do a little bit of CSS magic here in order to get these two elements, this span right here of John Smith and this span right here of aspiring software engineer, all on top of each other, but still kind of under this header element. So I'm going to come here, and when I want to work with two separate elements, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a class. That way I can easily reference it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do class equals, and I'm going to just name it something arbitrary. Let me do top span for now. And then conversely, for the bottom span, I'm going to do bottom span. Now what I'm going to do is when I go to my CSS page here, I can very easily utilize these classes over here in order to edit the CSS properties for this specific class. So in this instance, I will edit only the top span. In this instance, I will edit only the bottom span if I use these appropriate classes. So let me display that. So I'm going to use top span here, and I'm going to have it appropriately for bottom span. And just to kind of show this off, I'm going to apply a font size property of like, let's do extra large for this span right here. And is this extra large? That's pretty small. Let me do like 50 pixels. Okay, there we go. I don't know why extra large is not that large. I don't know. But anyways, as you can see, this John Smith is in its own span, and this is in its separate span. So as a result, when I edit the class properties just for the top span, it's only going to change this top span. But what I want to do is I want to utilize, or I want to find some way such that the top span and the bottom span, once again, are on top of each other. And I don't really have to kind of do anything in terms of working with this H1 element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back into here. And I'm going to also add an H1 element here, because remember, if you remember from earlier, these two spans here are still embodied within this header one. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to change the position of these spans so that they aren't on top of here. Because if you remember from our website from earlier, these spans were essentially a little bit more down from the page, and they weren't at the very top. But let's just make it so that both of these elements are a little bit down without worrying about the leveling of the two spans first. So in order to do that, we're going to be talking about something called the box model. And in essence, what the box model is it's a way that we're able to reposition elements in HTML. And a very easy way to visualize this is to simply inspect element. And when you inspect element and look over a certain element, so let's look over this header actually. Down here, you're going to see its box model. And as you see, this 1,136 pixels by 59 pixels, it's referring to the actual size of the substance, or kind of what's inside the header. And then the stuff on top of here, as you see, there's something called margin, which is 21.4 pixels. And what margin usually refers to is kind of the separation between the header, or not really the header, but whatever element it is from other elements. So right now, there's no other elements on the page. So what it's essentially doing is adding 21 pixels of space on top of the header, and conversely, 21 pixels of space underneath the header. So with that, I kind of want to change that a little bit. And this is where I'm going to be talking about playing in the DOM. So this is a DOM in essence. And what you can do in here is you can edit the CSS properties and actually test out your code as you go without working in your actual code. And this is extremely useful when you work with CSS, because realistically, me and you aren't going to know the exact precise pixelated values for what we want to do with our HTML and CSS elements. So this is a great way of kind of working with that. So all you have to do is you have to kind of go to the element that you want to. So right now it's header one. And as you see, this is kind of where we added the element.style right here. And so if I give it currently a margin top of like 50 pixels, what it essentially did was it added more space down here. So this whole header element kind of moved down. And this will give me a good idea of how far down I want to move this thing. So let me like try 100 pixels, maybe, that's fine. 30 pixels. Oh, my bad, that was 300 pixels. But for now, I'm gonna maybe stick to 100 pixels, maybe. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, maybe I'll try to do that. But another thing I want to do before I kind of exit out of this and work realistically on my CSS code is I want to also squeeze this header one for it to be a little bit more centered. I don't want to align it specifically in the center, but what I want to do is I want to get rid of it so it's not touching the left side of my screen. So as you can presume, margin top adds space to the top of the element. So in order to add space to the left side of the elements, all you have to do is you have to use margin left. So I'm going to go back to my header one here, and I'm going to give it a margin left attribute. And up here, you can see that I used this pixel value. With this, there's many things that each CSS property can take in. As you can see, it's auto-corrected here sometimes for some of the properties that are like predefined. But one of the properties that you can push into a margin style is percentages, and it's very useful. So right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say margin left of 10%. And what this basically means is that 10% of the screen, or basically 10% of the width of the screen, I kind of want to, add some space, that number of space to the left. And that way, I'm not really working in pixels anymore. I'm working in percentages, and it's just a lot easier for me to see what I want. I added margin left I added 10% margin left, or 10% margin to the left. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to also add a little bit of margin to the bottom. Realistically, you could add a margin to the right, but as you can see, like there's nothing here, so not necessary right now. But I'm gonna add margin bottom, and right now it might not seem that important about like why I would add margin bottom, but it's kind of important to kind of like visualize what it will look like in the future. So I'm gonna add 20 pixels of margin here, because in the future, what I want to do is I kind of want to add something under the header. So it's important that when I start working with these elements, I kind of plan ahead. So yeah, that's kind of what we have for that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to get these two elements on top of each other. So in order to do that, actually, before I leave, very important, very important. So whenever you're working in the DOM, this does not save. So when I refresh right here, all these styles that I currently added to this header is going to disappear. So it's very important that you save this. And when I say save this, I just mean like control, like C it, like copy and paste it into your actual code. So that way these style elements do not go away, because this in essence is kind of just like testing. It's not real code right here, or I guess it doesn't really change your page besides to you. So those were style elements I added to my header. So I'm going to add it here, and this is just all the margins. So now I'm going to save it, refresh it. The page should look the exact same, but that's thanks to this. The next thing I'm going to do here is I want to get these two elements on top of each other, which I've been stressing for like the past 5 minutes. And the way to do that is using this display property. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to specifically target the spans, because these are going to be shared between spans in essence. And what it's going to be is it's going to be this display element. And as you can see here, it autocorrects different ways to kind of display elements. But I'm going to display like a block. And what this in essence does is put them on top of each other. You can think of it as kind of like you're placing blocks on top of each other, kind of like Lego bricks. And that's kind of where the word block comes in, I guess. Anyways, now I have it so that my two elements are on top of each other, and it kind of looks a little bit closer to what I envisioned for a portfolio page. But with this, the text is really small. I'm zoomed out all the way now, but like even then, like this is really small. This is what I'm going to presume someone's going to come onto the page with. So I probably want this to be bigger so they can like see my name and also for it to look better. So I'm going to go back in here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the font size for these spans here. So here, as you can see, I already preset this John Smith to 50 pixels as kind of like an example earlier. I don't know if 50 pixels is necessarily enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click inspect here, and I'm going to play around with the values. And this is kind of the beauty of this DOM. So I'm going to change this to 75 pixels. Ooh, I think that looks a lot better. But let me see what appropriately I'll need to change it for the bottom span for it to look good. So right now, bottom span does not have any elements or any styles to it. So let me just add it here. Let me try 50 or 40, I guess. That's a little too small. I think that looks good. Now, 75 and 50 are pretty like round numbers, divisible by 25. So let's just stick with that for now. So for this top span, I'm going to, I already have a font size property. I'm going to change it to 75 pixels. Looks good. And I'm going to change the bottom span font size to 50 pixels is what we agreed on. And already our website is looking a little bit closer to what we envisioned. The next thing I want to do is I want to change this black text. It's really hard I'm sure it's very hard for you guys to see right now, this name, because it kind of blends in with this background of navy blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my color palette and choose a color for this. Let's use this orange color. And just like how I applied the background color for the background, in order to change the color for these spans, or kind of like what they are, all of this is color. It's not background color, it's just color. And similarly, because I'm using the hex value, I have to use this little hashtag thing and my semicolon. So now if I go back to my page here, that's something. Let me change the color of maybe this color for the bottom one. Let me try to do this to look a little bit better. Let's see what that looks like. That actually looks kind of good, or in my opinion, it looks good. If you guys think it doesn't look good, once again, this is a template, so you can change it however you want. But I think this is what I'm going to stick with Nav for now. So now what we kind of have is this like header kind of thing. Something very useful that you can do in your CSS, and you can do it in basically any programming language, is kind of just comment out stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out. So if I ever want to change the header portion, like I want to refer to it, it's very easy for me to refer to it in this CSS file, because this CSS file is going to get very large, because we're only going to be using this one CSS file for everything on all the pages. So for now, I'm just going to comment this out as header for all of this. And yeah, that is kind of all I need as far as I'm aware. I don't know how else I can make this look that much better. Maybe I can... No, I think there's enough spacing between all of this. So this is what I'm going to stick with for now. Now I'm going to want to think about what are the next couple of elements I want to add to the page. And probably one of them that is kind of important is kind of the top nav bar. So if you go to any website, you're going to see that there's this little nav bar at the very top, or on most websites, they do have this little nav bar. And what it basically allows me to do is kind of go to different parts of the page of the website by just simply clicking on it. So I kind of want that to represent my... But for now, we're only working on this front page. So why don't I go back to my HTML and kind of start coding that up. So when we're working with nav properties in, what was it called? HTML, there's a way to do it that was mentioned in the previous workshop, and that is using the unordered list tag. And this very simply just gives you an unordered list of things. So right now, if I was to create a bunch of A tags in here, which is what we're going to use, let me create like 3 tags for the 3 sites. And this is the current page that we're on. We're going to call it about. And I'm going to make another page called projects. Oops, let me all caps that for consistency. And then lastly, I'm going to create a page called contact. So if I save that and go into here, you're going to see that it's very small over here. And it quite literally is what it is explained as. It's an unordered list. Like, it's just a list of items. But it is in no way, or it doesn't look that much like a nav bar. I guess we can leave it as that. It's not the prettiest thing either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a little bit better in order to make it resemble a nav bar. One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to put it inside a div. Oops. And the reason I'm putting it inside a div is just so when I am going through this, and let's say I want to add something else to kind of the top part of the page, let's say not a nav bar, maybe I wanted to add, I don't know, like a little logo in the top left. It's just very easy for me to embody this all inside a div in order to, kind of represent the section. So as a result, I'm going to also name this class equals Navbar. And then for this unordered list, I'm going to call this nav link. Now, this is not necessary, but it's a lot easier to work with your code when you have everything under a class or an ID. I just prefer to use classes for me. And then for all of these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the same class. Now, this may seem a little bit redundant because you can see that since these are all technically in the navlink class, it will make sense that any CSS properties I do add to the navlink class will coincidentally also be adapted to these little links. But we're going to use this later on to see why it might be a little bit more useful to work on the class properties like this. So now if I save this, it's not going to look any different because realistically, all I did was just added a bunch of class names and put everything inside a div. So the reason I did all of this is to make styling a little bit easier, not so much the actual code. So with this, I'm going to go into, or actually before I do into that, I do realize something, which is this HTML code right here refers to the header, which is right here. And this HTML code right here, or this fragment of code refers to my nav bar. I want the nav bar to be on top of the header. So it's very important in HTML to chronologically order it, kind of like how they are going to be on the page. So in this instance, I want my nav bar to be on top of my header. So I'm just going to place it before. So as you see now, it just comes to the top left, but it's still on top of the header, which is what I want. The only problem is I want it to be kind of on the right side of the screen here, not so much this left. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to just jump into my CSS here. So similar to header, what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize the same thing in order to work with the nav bar. So I'm going to comment it out first, and this is going to be nav bar. And one of the first things I'm going to do is I want to reposition this to be to the right side of the screen. There's many different ways to do this, and this is kind of like the beauty of CSS in a way. With everything that you kind of stumble into a problem with when it comes to styling something, there's always going to be some like hacky way in order to do it, such that you're able to reposition something or you're able to style something kind of like how you want. For the navigation bar in particular, what I could do, if you remember what we talked about earlier regarding margin and the differences of spacing between this, what I could do is I can put a bunch of margin on the left side here so that this nav bar is pushed all the way to the right. But realistically, there's a lot much easier ways and better ways to do this. And one of them is Flexbox, which we're going to talk about now. If you just look up Flexbox, I think this is the best representation of kind of how it works. Flexbox is a way in HTML for you to kind of organize your elements, presuming there's a parent. So in this case right here, you can see that this purple box kind of represents what like a div would look like. And inside here are all these little HTML elements. And with this Flexbox, what I'm basically able to do is organize the elements inside my HTML page and position them correctly. So for me, or kind of what we want to do is we want to put this nav bar on the very right. And as you can see, using this flex end property is very useful for us. We can easily put all the elements on the very right. So that's what I'm going to use in order to make the nav bar on the right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to my nav bar like this. And I'm going to give it a display property of flex. Kind of like how I gave this display property of block for the span, you're going to have to give it a flex property for the nav bar. And right now, if you save it, nothing's going to change. Let me go on to the website here. Nothing's going to change. All you're saying is I want to display as a Flexbox, but I'm not giving it a type of Flexbox attribute in kind of a sense. And in order to do that, what I have to do is I want to justify the content and for it to be kind of like what we saw in that picture, which is flex end, which kind of just puts all the elements on the right-hand side right here. These are still a little small, so I'm going to make them a little bit bigger, I guess you can say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to my nav button. And inside my nav button, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it bold, because right now this text looks a little bit too skinny for me, and it's not really doing much for me. So let me do that. Font weight, bold. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of spacing between here. This looks a little bit too small for me. So let me add some spacing. In order to add spacing, just like we talked about earlier, all we have to do is add a little bit of margin. Right now, I think it's tagging too much onto the right. So I'm going to give some more spacing on the right now. Let me try 30 pixels of spacing. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Now, this is why we kind of refer to the, nav button. This is something we talked about earlier. Remember, we listed all these little individual elements of the little icons at the top of our nav bar in their own class. And the reason for this is because at each of one of these items, what I want to do is I want to give margin right to that specific property. So with that, I kind of have this up and working. But as you can see right now, there's still nothing that these places are going to. In other words, they're not going to go anywhere unless I change something. And realistically, what I have to do is I have to come back here to my A tags and give it an href attribute, just like I did for the link here. And like we talked about earlier, an href attribute, all this is you put in a link for it to go to. So for this about page, all I wanted to go to is index.html, which is the current page. You know, if they click the about page while they're on the about page, we're not going to really do much for them. For this projects page, we're going to have another HTML file called projects.html, which we're not going to work on right now. This is just planning ahead and then contact.html. But as you can see, when I did that, these now turn into links. They don't go anywhere except the about page. They go back, he goes back here, but now they're links. But a problem with them being links arises a new issue, which is now that I have this really ugly underline and it's purple. So I'm going to fix that. In order to get rid of underlines on your A tags, what you want to do is you want to use this text decoration property. By default, these text decoration properties are my bad. By default, the A tags automatically have a text decoration style to underline, like they're automatically underlined. But I kind of want to get rid of that. And in order to kind of get rid of that, all you have to do is do text decoration none. And with that, what you're going to see is these underlines go away. But even with that, what I want to do specifically, because whenever I see navigation items, I want it to be a little bit more responsive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a little responsive element. When I hover over these buttons, what I want it to do is I want it to underline. I don't want it to underline right now, but when I hover over it, I think it'd be pretty cool if it underlined. So let's do that. And we're going to talk about a little bit about how to add responsiveness in CSS. Usually when we talk about responsiveness, we're talking about when I play around with the elements on the page, like does something change? Is it responsive in a sense? And in order to do this, most of the time you utilize JavaScript, which is what we're going to talk about in our next workshop. But there's a little bit of neat tricks in order to do it in CSS. So in order to do it, there's only a few responsive elements, responsive properties in CSS, but one of them is the onHover property. In order to utilize it, what you do is you just call whatever class that you want it to be on. So in this case, a nav button, and you just write hover after a colon. And with this, what you're basically saying is when you're hovering over a nav button, you want its CSS to change to this. It's still going to maintain the CSS, but it's going to add this property as well. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it text decoration underline. So what this basically states that when it's regular, it's going to look like this. And when I hover over it, everything's going to be the same except text decoration is going to be underlined. So now when I hover over this, it's underlining. So it's a little cool. Like I said earlier, I do want to change the color of this. So I'm going to go back in my little colors thing to give it a color. I think for me personally, I'm going to give it a platinum. So the nav buttons are right here. So I'm going to give this, let me put it under that. Let me give it a color of that. If I go back to my page, yep, it's looking much better from here. So that's kind of what I want for my nav items, I think. Actually, maybe I can add a little bit more spacing. And with this, what I'm going to talk about is talking about other items in the box model besides margin. So if we look back into this box model, if some of you realize there's items in here that is outside of just margin. Obviously, there's the actual element itself, but more importantly, there's these two items called padding and border. Border is very self-explanatory. It kind of works with the border of the item. You can make it bigger or smaller. With the padding, though, what it basically implies, or how I like to think about it, is that it's adding margin, but to the inside of the element. I think this is best represented through a div, but in essence, what I want to do is I want to add padding here between these properties so that they're a little more separated than they currently are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my nav button, and right here I have margin right. I'm going to maintain the margin right, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add padding both right, padding right of 10 pixels and padding left of 10 pixels as well. And from this, they're a little bit more separated than they were previously, and I think it just looks a little bit better. So now we kind of have our page set out for our nav bar, our kind of front header. Now we need two more things. We need the bio down here, and we kind of want our socials in the bottom left. So let's do that really quick. I want to put my bio right underneath this header. So in order to make a box, because what we want or what we envision our bio to look like is to be inside kind of a box, all I have to really do is use a div. A div is just like an arbitrary kind of level of space. If I utilize some CSS elements on top of that, I can make it look like a box. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here. And inside this box, what I want to do is I want us to be able to write kind of like something about me, like quite literally a bio. So I'm going to call this class bio. Yeah, I'm going to leave this bio. And this p tag, I'm going to call it, I'm not going to give it a class because I don't plan to utilize a p tag again. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start writing in this so we can see what we're working with. And with this, what I'm going to write is, hello, I'm a computer science major at, okay. I'm going to type a little bit slower now so this doesn't happen. I'm a computer science major at the University of Central Florida. I'm just going to put that for now. And as you can see here, this is technically below the header element. It's in a box, but obviously this is not where the box wants to be. One of the first things you realize is that it's not positioned kind of with this, which if you remember, we added a margin left of 10%. So I'm going to add appropriately the same thing in order to the box. So let's do this for my bio. And if I remember correctly, I used .bio, or I gave it a class of bio. Yes, I did. I'm going to give it a background color first, actually, just so we can see what this looks like. I'm going to give it something that, you know, we can, yep. So here's my box. First thing I want to do is I want to add margin left of 10%, similarly to what we did here. And because it's a box, I also might want to add some margin right to that. I'm going to give it a margin right 10% as well. Let's see how that looks like. Yeah, I think this box is a little more centered so that it looks kind of as if there's margins on the Word doc. Looks really nice. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into here, and I'm going to start working with my p tag. For this p tag, what I kind of want to do is, obviously I want the box to be bigger, but I want it so that it's not like touching the edges of the box and all of that. So what I'm going to do in order to be able to do that is I'm going to add some padding to the box. Because when I add padding to the box, it's very similar as if I added a margin to the p element. So in order to kind of show this off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some padding here. And in essence, what I'm basically trying to get at is I want this to be a little bit further away from all of this. So I'm going to give it, let me work with this inspect here. Okay, and let me see if some padding top. Let me try 10 pixels here. Okay, that might be fine. Let me add some padding left here. Maybe some 5 pixels. Oops. I don't think, oh, I didn't spell it right. That's a little too low. Let me try 8 pixels maybe. I don't want to save it. Okay, that's a little bit better. You know, I'm actually going to delete these two. In order to get padding on all sides, or kind of to do this on all sides, you don't have to specify left, right, top, bottom. You can just put the whole thing. And kind of what I'm getting at here is I think that I'm going to have to add padding on all sides. So I'm just going to use the keyword padding. I'm going to leave it at 8 pixels here. Yeah, I think that looks a lot better. so that I don't have to specify each of the sections. So let me add padding of 8 pixels on all sides for my bio here. And now it looks exactly like how I want it to be. One of the next things I want to do is I want to make this box a little more rounded in corners, so it's not like a rectangle thing, because this is a little ugly in my opinion. So in order to add, or in order to make a box more circular in CSS, basically the property that you wanted to add is border radius. And if you just play around with these values, you can see that in essence what it is doing is it's making these borders more and more round. So if I give it a crazy value like 100 pixels, it's very round, but it's a little too round. I'm going to stick with 20 pixels for now. Yeah, I think that looks a lot better. And now I have my bio and I kind of have my header, but I think I can still change some things here in order to make it look better. One of the first things I think I want to do is I want to increase the font size across the board. This is a little too small for me personally, so I'm going to increase it, but this is on my P element, so I'm going to change it to maybe 20 pixels. Yeah, that looks a lot better. With this, what I'm able to do is I'm now able to kind of play around with my P element and kind of get it to the position that I want. One of the first things I realized when I'm looking at this is that it's still a little bit too far to the edge. I could add some more padding left here on the wider box, but instead what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to add margin on the P tag, just kind of show off that we can kind of utilize both padding and margin in order to add spacing between elements. I'm going to give it a padding left of 15 pixels. And I'm going to coincidentally also do it to the right, just so it's a little bit centered. And now it looks very good. You're not able to see the padding on the right, and that's because the text is too small. So let me add a bunch of text. Because I can't type a lot, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this. And now, you know, it's a really cool bio now. But one of the things I realized is that even though we have padding right now, so now it looks kind of centered within my box, this text is still a little too close to each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in my style.css and I am going to change the amount of spacing basically on top of text. And you can actually do this on a P tag. And the style in order for this to do this is called line height. And it kind of just signifies the amount of height that you want to give to the line itself. I'm going to give it to 25 pixels. And as you can see, now these are more spaced out in between. These are really small details, but these small details go a long way in building your website. I think I'm kind of done with everything in regards to text now. So now I kind of have my website written out and kind of the text form, or kind of all the text and what they're going to see substantively. And I want to change the font of everything. So let me do that. I don't want to change it for like, I want to change it for everything. And like we mentioned earlier, you can just use this HTML tag to adopt certain fonts for kind of the whole page as a whole. I'm going to use a very specific font here. There's some auto-corrected fonts if you look right here. You can also look up some of the fonts that currently exist in HTML. You can also import fonts. That's also a thing. I'm gonna preview a little bit of how to import stuff more specifically into your HTML code in a second. But this is a very specific font that I'm using. You don't have to memorize it. It's just for my sake. So now I'm gonna have to go like this. The font change. It looks a lot cooler. But with that, everything is kind of repositioned a little bit because the font kind of changed size. One of the things I realized is this went down a little bit more. So maybe I kind of want to change that. And because I have these very nicely organized margin for the header, I added a margin top of 100 pixels. Now with the font change, maybe I want to make it 90 pixels. I think that's a little bit better looking. Maybe I'm going to do like 88 or something. It's very, very unimportant, but it makes a web page look good as a whole. So now I kind of have everything done in regards to kind of text and everything. And actually, just to kind of show off that we can actually use these other fonts, I'm going to use a different font for the bio. And you got to do font family. That's my bad. And you can just scroll down in here and choose any one of these fonts in order for it. I'm going to use, let's use Cambria. So as you see here, this might not be the prettiest looking thing. Let me try something else. But you can let it autocorrect for you, and these do work. You don't have to type anything or memorize anything or anything like that. This one's really long, but it looks a lot better. So I'm going to keep it as that. The last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add my little socials in the bottom left. And with this, I need a little bit of Googling, because not everything in HTML and CSS is built from scratch. I think that's a large misconception that many people have going into and starting to build a website using purely HTML and CSS. They believe it's a lot more hard than it really is, simply because they just don't Google the stuff that they need to. And it's really easy to find social media buttons online and how to kind of import it. You don't have to style it. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is import it. And in order to import stuff, here's a W3 Schools tutorial on it, but it's very straightforward. All you have to do is just copy what you have to import it, put it into your HTML page. I'm going to put it right here on the head. So now I imported this style sheet in essence, but it's kind of like online. It's on the cloud. And I just read this tutorial on how to add these icons, and it says, oh, I just have to do this. Now I know a little bit of what's going on here, so I can explain it. What's going on here is, in essence, we are utilizing this very popular font library called Font Awesome. So if I go on to fontawesome.com, this basically has a bunch of icons that you'll see many websites utilize. Font Awesome is a very popular website in order to do this. And all you have to do is just type in the actual icon that you want, and it'll tell you right here if you imported their stuff, the class. So for LinkedIn, I see it's just Fab, FA LinkedIn. So I'm going to do that. I don't want Facebook. I think that's unprofessional for a portfolio page. Maybe I added Twitter. And because I know these classes ahead of time, you can check out the page yourself in order to do this. I'm just going to put it in. But as you see here, we have Twitter, we have LinkedIn. I guess GitHub. That's another important one. Oops. Let me go to my portfolio site now. And you don't see them. Oh, is this causing an error here? I'm not sure what's causing an error here. It's giving me this red icon. I don't see it. Max, do you see what's wrong with this?
You're missing a double quote.
Where is it?
LinkedIn.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay. Well, it's still not appearing on my screen. Did I import it wrong? I don't think so. Let me just try typing something here. Actually, I think I might know what's wrong here. If I go back here, maybe I added these wrong. I don't know. Let me just try adding a link to this, and we're going to see what happens. Maybe this will fix itself. I've never had this issue. When you're adding links to stuff, you actually have to put HTTPS. It's very annoying, but that's what it is. So I'm going to add twitter.com here, and let's see if this pops up now. I don't see it anywhere. Hopefully it's not blended in or anything. Oh, there it is. I don't know. I think I was zoomed in there, and that was really dumb of me. But yeah, here's the three icons here. And now I added the LinkedIn, or my bad, only the link for Twitter. So if I click on this, I'm going to see that it's going to redirect me to Twitter. I don't want it to redirect me. I want it to open in a new tab. And in order to do that, it's very simple. All you have to do is add this little thing right here where you write target is equal to quote blank. And I'm going to do this for all of them, except obviously with different links. LinkedIn, I'll put LinkedIn here, and GitHub, I'm going to put GitHub right here. And I kind of have my icons up and working. And if I click on them now, it kind of takes me to the appropriate link in the new tab, and that's what I want. I don't want this right here. I want this down here. So I'm going to go into my CSS really quick here. Yeah, I'm going to go into my CSS. I'm going to go all the way down. I'm going to create a new section because technically this is a footer. And one of the things I realized is that I never gave this a div. So I'm going to do that too. I'm going to call this footer first of all, but I want to put all of these elements inside a div just so it's easier for me to kind of work around this. And since these are technically, if you think about it, if you think about how these social media icons are going to look like, it's going to look like a nav bar except on the bottom. So I'm actually going to incorporate this into an unordered list as well. So let me do that. And now I kind of have my thing. I'm going to call the div on the outside right here. I'm going to call it just footer. And I'm going to call this unordered list down here, social links, like that. And these already have classes into them. I don't have to touch that. I'm going to go into my footer here. I'm going to start working on it. One of the first things I want to do, like I said, is I want to make these go to the bottom. An easy way to do that is to first make its position fixed. And the next thing, because I made its position fixed, what I'm able to do is utilize these this bottom property really easily. So I'm going to put 0 pixels right here, or just 0. And I'm going to show you what that does. Oh, I don't. Is it 0 pixels? Or is this not saving? Okay, there we go. I didn't save the HTML file. Anyways, by doing 0 or 0 pixels, I guess, I just learned that right now. What you're basically able to do is you're able to tell your CSS that, hey, I want 0 spacing at the very bottom. So whatever element that you add bottom 0, in essence, you're basically saying, put it at the very bottom. And it's already left shifted, which is totally fine with me. I'm fine with having it left shifted. The next thing I want to do, however, is increase the size of these. These are really small. And something cool that many people do not know about font awesome icons is that they're actually fonts. Even though they look like icons, like images and stuff like that, they're actually fonts. So what I can do is I can increase the font size by doing that. And ooh, there we go. Looks much better already. The last thing I want to do is I kind of want to separate these and change the color. Now, because I'm going to be working with the individual buttons, I cannot put it on social links. Instead, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to do it on these individual classes, like we very similarly did for this nav. But with this, we have these classes right here called FA and FA Twitter, which is what we got from the importer style sheet. And you can override that, similar to how you override stuff in JavaScript, for example, or anything like that. You can very easily overwrite CSS elements, and that's very important for what we want to do now. One of the first things I want to do is I want to get rid of the color to be not purple. I'm going to make a color white, which is part of our color palette. Yeah, that looks much better. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm also going to get rid of this underline, which we've discussed earlier. All you have to do is do text decoration none. And already from the lessons that we learned throughout this entire workshop right now, we are automatically utilizing it. I want to add spacing between it. I'm just going to give it an arbitrary number of 10 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Looks good to me. And I want it to be circular. I don't know this GitHub icon circular, but these are not. So I'm going to give it a border radius. Hopefully that makes it a little circular right here. I don't want it to be too large because the icons themselves are small. I don't know if that gave it a radius. I think it did. Is it blending in with the back? Maybe it is. But regardless, these are links that are kind of working now. So now I kind of have the whole front page working. And now what presumably at this stage is what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on my other pages. But I'm not going to be doing that anymore. I'm going to be handing over the mic to Max in order for him to show you how to work on the contact page and how to form there.
All right. Yep. All right. So let me just share my screen. Give me a second. Okay. So everybody can see my screen. Just double checking, see the Visual Studio Code and. All right, I see thumbs up. Okay, so yeah, like Ryan said, this is basically how it should look like. It maybe look different because of anything he might have made, but this is what you should have at the moment. But now we're actually going to go into the contacts page. We're going to work on what people want, like if anybody wants to contact you, how you want it to look like. So to make things a little bit more easy, I thought it would be easy. I thought it would be nice if everybody just go to the index HTML file, copy everything.
Max, I think you're sharing the slide still. Sorry, I meant a thumbs up, but you can see your screen, not the specific.
Oh, okay, let me fix that. Oh, you are right. I am. Let me share my screen. Oh no, wait, this is the wrong screen again. Okay, can you see it now?
Should we see the contact.html?
Yes.
VS Code? Yes, I can
Okay.
see it.
All right, cool. Sorry about that. All right, so everybody, just go to your index HTML file, Control A or select everything, copy it, paste it. Now to save some time, we're gonna just delete what we're not gonna use. So starting at the bottom with the div that we just made for the footer, we're gonna delete everything all the way until we reach the nav bar. You don't want to delete the nav bar, so just delete everything except the nav bar that's inside of the body. Save that, and as we can see, actually, as we're gonna see, it should like right here. So as you can see now, this is what it should look like for your contact HTML. Good. So now how we're gonna start this, I was thinking we could have a big, almost like a rectangle or like a big container, a div in the screen that's gonna hold two smaller rectangles. One is gonna have like a contacts form. So if anybody, I don't know if you guys ever seen, people usually have like a input box that you can type like a message, your name, and sometimes your email too, so that you can reach out to the person's website, to the person who owns the website, and they can reach back out and have like a conversation. And we can also have some other extra information. So you want to have, again, your social media, your email, phone number, and so on. So let's get to it. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add the big rectangle, like we said, and for that we're gonna make a div. We're gonna give it a class. I'll just call this maybe like a main container. Since it's gonna contain two things, we're gonna call it just main container, and we're gonna close that. Then, like we said, we're gonna have the two smaller divs inside of it. So it's basically gonna be two smaller rectangles on the screen. So like right here, we're gonna say another div with a class of sub container. And then we'll do the same for the other. Now, if you are in Visual Studio Code, something that you can do that's really cool, you can just type div, and you can see that it has this M abbreviation. If you press tab, it automatically sees it, to automatically detects when to create a div. But what you can also do is type like any element, so like div, and then if you want to put like a class, you just put period, and then the class you want to put. So this I'll just call sub container right here. And then now we have our two sub containers. Next, we are gonna put some style for this main container, so we have an idea of how it's gonna look like. So I want to actually say this, go to our style sheet, scroll all the way down. I already had this comment, so like I know exactly where the contact HTML says CSS starts. It's up for preference. You don't have to really do this. It's just for me, I prefer having like a separation, so it's easier to see and organize things. So the first thing we're going to do is that although we cannot see the divs, they are present. So if I was to actually type any text here and press, oh, no, it is actually here. It is very hidden. So what we're going to first do is we're going to actually create the big div. So let's go to our style CSS, and we're going to start with its properties real quick. So for this first big div, we want to first give it some width. So since I want it to be in the middle of the screen, what I can say is that I want to, so if I type dot main container, we want this main container to be on the middle of the screen. So one way that you can do that is really cool. You can actually first give it a width. So let's say I wanted to take like 60% of the screen. And then with that, I want to also have it in the middle. So since we already have the width and it's going to take 60% of the screen, we can also say that we wanted to have the margins left and right to auto. So it's automatically going to detect like what the margins should be. Since they're both auto, they're going to eventually cause it to be centralized. Now, I don't think this will show since we may not have any height. So we'll actually, maybe if I put like a text here, it will show. So you guys have an idea. Yeah, it kind of does. It's because the width is really big, it looks like it's like right here, but you guys will see real quick. So if we go back to our margin class right here, the main container, sorry, we are gonna now add some height to it. So let's give it a height of, let's try 500 pixels because we want it to be pretty big, take up like most of the screen. And then just to differentiate the actual colors, let me actually give a background color. So going back to our color palette, I'm actually gonna take this lighter blue right here called light periwinkle. So let me just copy that real quick. And let me just make sure I copy this correctly. Put a background color, and let's put some hashtag color right here. And then going back, as you can see, this is what our div looks like for now. It is pretty centralized horizontally. The only thing that is not centralized at the top, as you can see, is like touching the nav bar. And that's something that we don't want. So before that, I think maybe the size of this is a little too small, the height. So I'm gonna just make it 600 real quick, so that it is a little bit bigger. And then to make it more centralized vertically, I'm gonna put some margin at the top so that it kind of pushes it down to the center. So I'm gonna come here, I'm gonna say margin top, and we'll say, let's try like 100 pixels and see how that looks. All right, so if we check it out, it looks pretty good. I think I may leave it at 100 pixels. It is pretty centralized on the left, right, top, and bottom. So we'll leave it at that. Now, some things that we want to do is we first, again, since we're doing like we did before in the about page, we want it to be almost like round too. We don't want these sharp edges, this kind of preference, but we'll just put some border radius to it so that it gets a little bit more round in the edges. So let's do like 20 pixels. And as you can see now, it is much better. Let me actually delete this test because we don't actually need this. All right. Next, we have the width, the height, the border radius, the color. So we can start actually working on these sub-containers. So like we used before like the way, since we're gonna centralize these containers, basically have one on the left and one on the right. I think a nice way to do this would be using this flex. So I can show it real quick again. So if I type Flexbox, justify content, and I show this picture, what I'm aiming for is that we can have something like this last option right here, where we're gonna have our, although it shows 3, we'd have two containers inside of this big one, and they would have even space around them, although they're gonna be pretty big. So I'm just gonna make it using Flexbox so that we can have a nice little spacing between them. So going back to our website, we're gonna come into the main container and we're gonna say display. We're gonna use flex, and then the justify content, we're gonna use flex. Actually, not flex. We're gonna use space evenly. This is just make sure that around every element is gonna be the same amount of space. Now we can't really see how it looks, but then this one we're gonna start actually working with our subcontainers. So I'm gonna create a new class for that for subcontainers. And now we are gonna add some things. So let's get to it. So the subcontainer, we want them to basically take as much space as they can, but also be almost like half and half of the screen. So we can say something like, so one thing about Flexbox is that it automatically assumes that you don't want items. So if I had two boxes here, it assumes that you want the items to be in the same line and not go to a new line in case they are too big. So assuming that it's not going to really push any items down, we can just say that every container has 100% of the space of this box. But since they are both going to be 100, they're going to even out and they're going to almost like end up the same size, although they're going to be less than 100. After that, we do want to create a background color on it because in the end, we want to be able to see that it is a different color. Now for that, we can thinking about it, I don't want it to be the same color as the main container. I want it to be a little bit darker, almost like maybe like a black shade. So one thing that you can do in CSS, you can use a background color, this property of RGB. Now RGB allows you to choose the color based on red, green, blue values. So it's like 1 through 255, but we can also type RGBA. And RGBA also allows us to change the transparency basically. So let's say I have 255, no, not 0, 0, 0, that's for black, but I want it to be very faint, like almost transparent of background. So like very faint, like almost like a shadow. You can say 0.1. And at the moment, I don't know if you can see it right now. It's very light blue, but then as soon as I uncomment that and save it, it's a little bit darker. That's because the subcontainers are actually taking the whole container, the whole main container. They're taking over the whole main container and making it look darker, but we don't want that. So the first thing we're gonna do is give it some margin so we can actually have like a little spacing between them. So let's give it a margin of 15 pixels. Now you can actually see that the two containers, the subcontainers are here. They're not taking over the whole space. They're both evenly on each side, the same amount of space between them, each of them. All right, next, I think a nice thing that we continue is just keeping it, I don't know what this is showing, but we'll just keep it border radius 20 pixels. Oh, I see that maybe. Oh, okay, no, all right. So we keep a border radius of 20 pixels again, just to make everything nice and round. All right, cool. So now that we have our containers both here, let's start working on actually what we want inside of them. So again, on the left, I was thinking maybe like an email form or some type of form that they can send messages to you. And then on the right, it would be just some plain information about you or your phone number, your email, whatever you like to share to other people. So let's go back to our contact HTML and let's get to it. So the subcontainer right here, Since these two divs are essentially going to have different things in them, just for the sakes of like scalability, I'm going to give them also different classes more than just a subcontainer. I'm going to say that this first div, which is the one on the left, is going to be called contact form. And then this one on the left, this one on the right, actually is going to be called info, because it's going to keep track of our information. Now, inside of the contact form, we're going to create a form element that's going to have a class, or we can actually just give it an ID. So to make it more specific, this form is going to have a specific ID, and we'll say something maybe like email form, and we'll close that. All right. Next, we want to have inside of this form, we want to have a couple of inputs. We want to have the person to have their name, maybe their email, and just a message box so they can type a message. And also a button, because of course they got to click something to actually send it to us. So again, we're going to say input for the name. Always when you're specifying an input, you can specify different types. So I'll show you real quick. So if by default, I believe, yeah, HTML assumes it's a text type. So basically you're typing text into this, but there are other types. So for example, I believe you can put like, color, for example, I believe is one. Yeah, you can check the color, different colors, but we're gonna be using text. I guess one tip would be like, if you guys ever seen input boxes with password, so you see you can't really see the password, is very ineffective, a way of hiding passwords. You can, if you ever forget something, you can just type text and fix it, but that's kind of like random. So we have our input type of text. Now, this is gonna be where we're gonna hold our name. So I'm gonna call the name of this input. Now I'm gonna explain why we're doing this later too, because it also relates to the form. We're gonna give a name for this input of just name, because that's where the person is gonna type their own name. Then we're gonna create another input with the type of text again. And the name for this input is gonna be email. This is where the person is gonna type their own email. And lastly, not lastly, the third thing we're gonna do is type a text area. So it's just a big text box that people can type into. Inputs are usually, for input text, are usually just this one line that extends horizontally. If you wanna have a big box of text, you wanna usually use a text area. And we're gonna create a text area, and I'll just give it a name of message. So as you can see, it's kind of working, but it's looking very ugly. And then lastly, we'll just say a button. And this button is actually going to be called, I'll give it a name of, actually there doesn't really need a name. I'll just give it button. And I'll put text between it. So it actually says send. So whenever you want to send your message. Now, one thing as you can see is that all these inputs are almost like in the same line. You don't want them to be in the same line. So we want almost to have like one on top of the other, so people can, it looks nicer and it's not just all over the place. So there are many ways you could do this. You can maybe set all these to display blocks. So I can actually show this real quick. I can say everything inside of this form is going to have a display block, it's going to be a display of block. So to do that, we can go to our HTML and say form, or form, and then anything that is, I'll actually say everything inside of this email form. So the hashtag is how you can, in CSS is how you can actually select based on IDs. So as you can see, one thing about Visual Studio Code shows right here, basically any elements that has the ID email form, which is just one element, which is this form, we're gonna say anything right below it that is direct child of it is gonna have a display of block. So now they're all in their own lines. So a good way to think is that blocks take over the whole line, but if you have something that's inline, it depends on the width. It may share the line with something else. All right. Next, as you can see, everything is all the way on the left. I think it's nice to have everything usually centralized and with the same, usually the same heights and widths. So we're gonna first say that we're gonna do text align center. I'm sorry, not text align center. Actually we're gonna say subcontainers right here. We don't want everything in the form. We want everything overall actually. So I'm gonna say right here. It's gonna say text align center. So everything in our subcontainer is gonna be centered. Now I don't know why this is not centered. Where did I mess up? Subcontainers. We want to have text align center. Let me just double check sub container. I'm typing this correct. For this class, width, background, margin, radius, text align, center, display, block. Oh, it may be because of this block. Yep. Okay, it is because of. Okay, so yeah, because of this block, it actually doesn't align the inputs. So never mind. Let's scratch this idea of the blocks. Well, actually, instead of blocks, one other trick that you can do, you can actually just put breaks on your HTML. I think someone mentioned line breaks in the chat before. Line breaks, you usually should use this for text. Well, another thing you can do is that you can just specify a BR or a break, and it's almost like pressing enter. It puts things in a new line. So as you can see now, this by itself is like an enter, and then you can do that for every element prior. And now everything's on their own line, has a breaks, and then everything's centralized. All right, cool. So next is that these elements are very squished. As you can see, we want to give them some space between each other. So we just add some margin top. So margin at the top, and let's say it's about 20 pixels. All right, it looks better. We are going to increase the height. So of course, don't worry if it looks too small still, like the margin top, it is gonna eventually adjust with the height. So we can make any changes as we like. So another thing, we want them to be all round. We're kind of keeping this like round vibe in this whole project. So we'll just follow along with it. We want everything to be round. I guess it's like the new norm to have things round. It looks more modern. So we'll keep that with the border radius of 20 pixels. Next, we do want to increase their width and their height before we do anything else, because otherwise it just looks very small as we make the changes. So let's give everything a width of, so one thing is that I believe is if we say 100%, first of all, it's going to take over all this whole subcontainer. It's not going to have any spaces around the edges. And then I believe input boxes sometimes overlap. Yes, input boxes end up almost overflowing the containers or divs. So one way we can just fix that is just maybe making it smaller, 90 or not 900, 90. So then now it is still in the middle and it has enough space around the edges. And then lastly, we can give everything a height of, let's say like 30 pixels. That looks pretty good. Let me maybe 40 pixels. All right, that looks good. We'll leave it 40 pixels. All right, cool. So next is kind of like my preference is up to you guys if you want to change it later. Now, one thing is that I hate how these things have like almost like a black border. I think it looks kind of ugly. Usually when I have it just like nice white text. So the first thing is that you want to take out the border. So to build that, we just type border, referring to the border element, and we type none. And that will take out the black edges. But as you can see, when we click on it, it comes back right up. Now this is actually an outline. So to do that with the outline, we just type outline none. And then now when I click on things, it actually has no border. Another thing it's kind of preference too is that you can actually resize this text area. It's really up to you, but like I would rather to have a fixed size, because sometimes the user could just go mess around and then there goes your whole design. And then they're gonna like complain how it doesn't look really good or something like that. And you just want to make sure everything is almost like the way it's supposed to be, because sometimes things are not really to be messed with too much. So to prevent any errors through like people moving it too much and prevent any problems with the design, you can just say that for text areas primarily, we want to have no resizing. And to do that, we can actually just go to a new line. Now to refer to our text area, we do have our actually, I'll give it an ID too, since there may be other text areas that we could want to change. So I'll just say ID of message. So this now text area has an ID of message, and we're going to say that a message, or not at the hashtag message, is going to have a resize of none. So now as you can see, you can't really hold on the corner right here and move things around. All right, only thing is that now the messages, the space you have to type a message is the same as an input line, which usually is not what you want. You want to have more space so the user can see more of the text they have in the message. So for that, I'll probably make the height a little bit bigger, make it 300 pixels. So now it takes more of the space and you have more space for the message overall. Maybe due to the space we have left, Let me see. I think I'll probably say this then 350. 340 because that at least looks a little squished. All right, 340 looks good. 340 looks good for us. Also, I understand that I am on a desktop right now, so there may be a chance that if you are on a laptop, some things may look a little bit bigger to you than it does in my screen. That's because my monitor is like pretty big, so it's bigger than like a laptop screen, so that's why it may have like look more, has like more spacing or something. Just FYI. All right, great. So now one thing that it's very unnoticeable, but is that, I mean, it is very noticeable, is that it's very hard to distinguish what's supposed to be a name, what's supposed to be an email, and what's supposed to be a message. So like if you were just about to, a random person who joined my website and saw this in the context page, you would be like, what the hell? Like, what do I type here? So there's various ways you could do this. I think one of the best ways that you can, or not the best ways, one of the ways that you could do this is you can put a label on top. So that says name, or like a piece of text, they're called labels, right? On the top it says name, email, message. Another way that you can do this, I think it looks really nice, just putting a placeholder. So it's gonna be like a faint piece of text that's gonna show whenever the input is blank. When the person starts typing, it will actually disappear. So to really see that into action, we can just go to our HTML. In our input element, we're gonna create a new attribute of placeholder. And we're gonna just say your name. And as you can see now, it says your name. And if I was to type Max Bagatini, now it doesn't say your name anymore, it says Max. But as soon as I delete that, it goes back to your name. Then we're gonna do the same thing for these other things. So we're gonna say for the email, we're gonna create a placeholder of your email. Let me move this more to the center. And then for the message, we're gonna say a placeholder of, let's see, message. And all right, so this is how it looks like. We have the message, email, your name, and the button right here. So one thing that's very noticeable is that the font, I think you can see, is very different. So test, test, and test. The font for the inputs are different than the message. And the font in the message and the inputs is different from our overall font. Now, why do they do that exactly? I'm not sure, since we did specify we want the font in HTML content, but to just reinforce that attribute or the property, we can scroll back up in our CSS style sheet, go to the bio right here, or whenever you find this font that we had copied from before, copy it, scroll down into the CSS for the email form that we did the IDs, and we're gonna just paste it anywhere inside of it, the font family. And you can see now it should change everything. Now, if I type about, as you can see, it's very similar to the one at the top, except it's not bolded, but yep. That's how we change the font. Now, another thing is that everything's very squished. It's almost painful how it's like cutting off the A right here. And then the test is super squished. That's because of how we created the border radius. So to fix that, we can just add some padding on the left and on the right. And over here for the text area, we can also do it at the top, because the text area seems to have less space at the top than the inputs do. So what we're gonna say is we're gonna come here and we're gonna say padding left for everything is gonna be 10 pixels, and then padding right is gonna be 10 pixels. All this is doing is just putting more space between the actual content inside of the input box and its edges. Now it has a little bit more space for everything. Only thing is that the text area specifically still has very little space in the top, so we want to add more padding. So here we can just say padding top 10 pixels, and then padding bottom 10 pixels. Now we do the bottom because eventually there could be a possibility that someone's gonna write a bunch of like a very long message that eventually hits the bottom, and then it has too little space in the bottom. Now, although we kind of fixed it now, if I saved it up, it kind of fixed it before. If I was to take this out, it would be very close to the bottom. So we want to take account into the bottom too. All right. And then if you wanted to, instead of having to write it twice for the padding, since we already wrote, since we're doing 10 overall for the text area, we're doing 10 in all sides. We can just delete these two and just type padding 10 pixels. It's just preference if you want to just specify this top and bottom, but you can also just do padding for everything. All right, good. So let me just kill this. All right. Next, let me clear this up. All right, next is that we have our, oh, this is us. Next is that we have our button right here. It is a button, but some things may want in a button is that it looks very almost like plain, or like it doesn't do any responsiveness to show that it's clickable. So that's something that usually wants in a website. So for example, when you go to click a link, it underlines and changes the cursor. Buttons, since the buttons don't usually they don't change the cursor, we want to have some type of way to show that it's a button. So since we did have our own style added to it, we also want to make sure that we have some type of responsiveness that shows it's a button. So for that, I am going back into the HTML. I'm going to find our button. Now, just in case we have other buttons, actually, we'll just use the elements. So we're going to say for every buttons, actually, for every single button, we're going to add a property whenever we hover over the button. So whenever we put our mouse on top of it, like we used before, we're going to change the CSS for it so that it changes a little bit of the background color. So let's say background color is going to be, let's say some type of like gray. So it is very gray, but let's do something darker. Like perhaps, let's do RGB. And let's say like 197 for all values. That should be a pretty light gray or something like that. So when we save that, when we go back to our page, when you hover over the button, as you can see, it does end up actually changing colors now, so that it looks very much like you can click on it. Then if you were just hover over it, and then it does nothing. One thing I'm noticing though is that this button is very squished to the bottom. Now, I think maybe we can just fix that. Let me find it real quick. Is where we were doing the height. We can try to increase the heights of the height of everything to make sure that the button is not as close to the bottom. So let's come here to the height and maybe like add 10 pixels to it. All right, that looks better. We got a little bit more space here. Overall, I want to say 10 for the margin, so that the margin for all the subcontainers is actually going to be 10 now. And then it looks, I think it looks a little bit better. It looks pretty even, the top and the bottom. So we'll leave it at that. All right, so that is pretty much everything for our contact box. So the only thing that I'll get into it real quick is that it doesn't actually properly work. So I guess going back to the form, how forms usually work is that you can add an action to the form. So you have this element called actions, the action, and then you can actually tell it to go to a certain path, or I'm not 100%, but I believe you could put some scripts here too. But actions, usually what people do in forms, they have another file, usually like a PHP file, that takes all the inputs from your form and process them. So you would have something like send message.php. This would be the page you would want to go to process all the information. So like, let's say I type max at email.com and then test. When I click send, the form takes me to this new URL. But as you can see in the bottom, there's also this question mark, and it has the inputs that we had. Now, the only reason that it actually shows in the URL is because for forms, for it to actually transfer over the arguments or the parameters, you actually need to specify the names. So it takes these names that we gave to each input, and it passes them to the URL. This question mark just says that it's basically parsing between what's the path, and then when do we start the argument. And then this is name, and then the ampersand just separates each basically argument or parameter, as you want to call it. But I guess the PHP lesson, I guess, will be for another day, or if you guys really want to get into it, you can look at your own time. There are a bunch of resources on it. We'll leave the styling just for now right here. And this is one side of what we can do. Now, the next thing we're going to work on is our subcontainer with the information. So this is where we're going to put like maybe our email again, put like a little like overall like, oh, UCF, like UCF Orlando, phone number maybe if you like to. Depends really. I know having a phone number on the internet is not the best idea sometimes. And then some social media. So let's get into that. So for everything in there, so for all of this, I actually want to create a div for every separate thing, just to separate things more nicely. So I'm going to create 4 divs. So I'm going to say first going to be a div with a class. This is using the abbreviations that VS Code lets you do. So div period. I'm gonna call this location, and then just open that up, I guess, since we're gonna use it real soon. Then we're gonna say div or div period. Let's call this email, and then open that one up. And then we're gonna say div the class of phone number. Of course, you guys are free to change this at any time later since it's only a template. If you want to change it for something else, feel free. And then it's gonna be div dot social media at last. So this is where we're gonna reinforce our social media icons like GitHub, LinkedIn, or even Twitter. All right, so when we say that, it doesn't really look like much. That's because we have nothing inside of them. So let's actually get to it. So I'm gonna actually put a paragraph inside of each one of them so that we can actually put some text, and it's gonna take its own line. So for the location, I'm gonna say something like, let's do University of Central Florida, Orlando, FL. All right, as you can see, it's right here. Then I'll go to our email right here, create another paragraph or another P tag, and I'm gonna say for my email, since I believe we are role playing John, and we're gonna say johnsmith@email.com. And then for the phone number, John has a very unique phone number. He's gonna have the famous 1-2-3-4-5-6-7-8-9-0 phone number. That's great. And then lastly, the social media. Social media will actually leave it at the end. Since these are not going to be really text, the social media is going to be the icons that we have at the bottom here. So I believe I could just copy this if I want to really get lazy to it. So if you like to copy social media right now, you can just go back to our index.html, copy what we had for the footer, and paste it inside of our context HTML inside of this div class called social media. And then we just properly tab these, save, and yep, it looks perfect, honestly. So that's great. So we have our social media, the texts. Now let's make them look a little bit better, because right now it looks really plain. It's just like sitting there. It has no style to it. So let's change things up a little bit. So the first thing I think is that it would be very nice to have almost like little icons next to each of one of them. I think just having the text is usually very nice, but if you have like a little icon is very, I think it looks much better. Having maybe like a little map here, making like an email icon, phone number, etc. So one way that we can do that is just to continue and just go and use the font awesome thing that we have imported before that allows us to create these icons in a page. So we're gonna go to our contact HTML, and we're gonna before each paragraph. Now, if we were to put a class here of FA, and like FA, I think envelope is for the map envelope. You can see that it actually changes the font size. Since it is a font itself, FA, it's gonna end up overriding everything the default font of the page with its own font. So it's gonna have basically change it to whatever this is, which looks like Times New Roman and all white. Now to prevent that, we can actually just not put any classes for a paragraph, and separately on top of the paragraph, we can create a span that has the class for the envelope. So it's a span with a class of FA, and this one's gonna be FA-envelope. Now I wonder why it's in a new line. Oh, right, that's because we actually want the span to be it's with the paragraph. So the way that it works, that spans, they're called inline elements, meaning that if there are other elements that are also in line that also have this property of inline, and it's not taking the whole line, it shares the same line with these elements. So since the paragraph is called the block element, it basically takes the whole line. We can put the span inside of this paragraph so that we can actually have it right before our text. So it's gonna look right next to our text right there. And then to be a little lazy, we can just come here, copy this. Instead of having to retype everything, you just copy what we did for the envelope, paste it for the email, and then do the same thing for the phone number since it's the last icon that we made. But then everything looks the same. So let's fix that. For our email, we can actually, for our map, we can actually change this to, I believe it is map. Yep, it's actually just map, and it actually shows you a little map icon. The envelope for the email looks really good. And then the last thing is the phone number. We actually just want to come here, and type phone. Now what phone does is gives you this icon. All right, cool. Now we're almost done. Last thing we're gonna do is just centralize this, maybe change the colors from all white. I think all white looks a little bit too white with the blue. I think we want to have a little bit of change, have some contrast. So one of the first things that we can do is go back to our CSS. We can specify that the icons. So if we were to do FA again like this, we would end up overriding whatever colors we have here at the top. So if I was to do FA, I believe color, I don't know, tomato, which is the one that we're gonna use. This looks nice now, but if we go back to our homepage, it's gonna end up overriding the colors here too. So to prevent that, we wanna only have these ones to be the tomato color. So we're gonna go back to our context page and we're gonna specify that all the FAs inside of this info div. So basically we're gonna say .info space FA. So if you hover over, it says every FA that is a child or eventually is the descendant, is that you can say it. It's like basically it doesn't have to be a direct child, so it doesn't have to be directly under an info. It could be various layers below. Any FA that's various layers below that, below a element with the info class, it's gonna have a color of tomato. And then that just makes it look a little bit better. But again, feel free to change it later. This is just up to personal preference. You can use other colors of our color palette too as you'd like. Next thing, I want to centralize. I want to actually make these icons bigger before centralizing it. So let's make these icons bigger too. So let's say font size 32 pixels. And that, oh, actually, we do not want to do that because otherwise it's going to change everything. Because if you do end up changing the font size, it would change these two, but we're only going to change the social media ones since they look pretty small. Since we want to be more, we want to show them, make sure that they are a little bit bigger so it shows that those are the social media too that we have. So we're actually all going to a new line and we're going to say, if we go back to our context HTML, we do have this class called, we have an unordered list called social links, and we also have this class called social media. So I'm just gonna reference this class called social media. I'm gonna say .social media, and then anything under it that is .fa. So that is an icon that has this class FA. Is gonna have a font size of 32 pixels. And then just to make sure that this is actually changing sizes. Great, it is. So you can see we can change it as big as you like or as small as you like. I'm gonna leave it, I think, 40, maybe 40 pixels. All right, 40 pixels looks pretty good. And then lastly, all we want to do is just centralize this vertically because it is centralized already horizontally from the past properties that we had. Centralize it vertically, we can kind of do the same thing that we did before with this whole big box. We can kind of push it with a margin, but if we were to do a margin, it would kind of push everything under it. What we want to do is we want to put a padding at the top. So between the sub container and anything inside of it, it's going to have a lot of space so that it pushes it down. So to do that, we're going to go to our, actually, since we're only affecting this sub container and not this other one on the left, we want to actually specify just the info. So that info sub container, we're going to say the padding at the top of, let's say 50 pixels. What that looks like. Oh, not 50 pixels. All right, that looks a little bit better. Oh, I don't want to actually save this. Let's do 100. And I think, let's do 115. All right, that looks much better in my opinion. And I think everything looks nice. I think the last thing, almost like the icing on the cake, is that you want them to be able to click. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before, but usually emails, when you click on them, I don't know, it usually like opens up your own email tool or email program and actually runs it for you with already this specified. So one thing that we can do in HTML, which is pretty cool, if we go back to our context HTML, when we're specifying the text here for the phone number, if we wrap it around, let's do, since we want the icon to be clickable too, let's do everything. So let's wrap everything around an A tag. So I'm gonna just make this look a little bit better. Change everything. Okay, so now we have this A tag. We're gonna put an href for the phone number. So instead of going to like a link, we're gonna go to a tel, and we're gonna specify 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. So as you can see, it is clickable. And then for the email, we'll do the same thing. We'll do an A tag, copy this over, put it correctly indented. And then lastly, we're going to put an href of mail to, and then whatever your email is. So this is johnsmith@gmail.com. And then when we save this, again, lastly, it is clickable now. There are links, but now they look very ugly. So to finalize it, we'll go back to our CSS, and we're gonna say that since this is inside of this div right here, the info, we're gonna say for the class info, any A tags, we're gonna take out any decoration. So we don't want the underlining. And then lastly, we want to change the color. So the color is going to be just black. That was the color for the others. So now as you can see, when we hover over, it is clickable, but it just doesn't really show, like the purple colors anymore or the underline. I guess if you're really going to get into it, you could put like an underline. Or the only thing is that it would also affect these icons at the bottom. Now, let me just double check. I think that is pretty much all. I guess what I wanted to show real quick what I meant when I click is that if you click on the email, it opens by itself up your email platform with the sender. And if you click the telephone, it does try to call. I bet on the phone, if you clicked on it, it would actually open your phone, your call, or I believe contacts app. But yeah. Other than that, I believe that's all for today, at least for the contacts page. So we were able to build the about page, and then we were able to build the contacts page. Now, the projects page and everything else with the JavaScript will actually be for next meeting. So I hope to see you guys next meeting for that. Now, before everything, I do want to share something more. Let me just share my screen real quick. I do want to share the PowerPoint now. All right, so is everybody able to see the PowerPoint? Just want to double check that. Is it the correct one? Let me just make sure I'm not sharing. Okay, yep. All right, cool. I see a thumbs up. All right, so first I want to thank you guys for everybody for coming out today. Well, I think I closed that by accident. Sorry about that. I want to thank everybody for coming out today and being part of the workshop. And before we end this, first, please fill out the feedback form so we can figure out what we can do better and how you guys think we did. And I'll drop that in the chat real quick. Oh, I guess Hannah did it before me. All right, she's pretty fast. Second, I want to say that for everybody who may have felt like they weren't able to finish everything, the code that we did today, or everybody that didn't attend is watching the recording, the code that we did today will be saved and distributed next meeting so that anybody who didn't attend the workshop does not really have to go through the whole video and copy every single little code. You can just attend the next workshop and we'll give everybody a link to download this and they can use this as like the starting template for the portfolio next week. Third, it kind of goes with the code too, is that everything is going to be recorded on YouTube. So in case you miss something and you'd like to go back to a certain section, it's all going to be there. And then lastly, if you guys want, there are extra resources that you can use to learn more about the topic. I know there's a lot that was covered today that may have not been covered exactly last weekend because there's so much to learn about HTML and CSS and so many things you can do. So me, the tech leads and I, we did this Google Docs that has a bunch of links that you can use. So I'm gonna just drop it real quick in the chat so everybody can take a look if they like. Have other links for a couple of videos and a couple of websites that really help out with this whole journey. And yeah, and then I hope to see you all in the third and last workshop of the series. Next week, we'll be introducing JavaScript and implementing it to our portfolio. So unless anybody has any like last minute questions, anything, any comments, questions, concerns, we'll all stay here a little bit longer and answer anything. But other than that, I hope you all take care. Yep. I'm just looking here in the chat to see if there's anything, but yeah, take care, guys. Well, thank you.